name is Dr. Roper. You are in the right place. What we do here is help you with your writing, whatever kind of writing you might have, at whatever stage of the writing process you might be in. So today, we're talking about what we mean by the writing process, and we'll have an opportunity to do a little bit of practice as well. So first of all, sometimes when we think about the writing process, I have a feeling that we too often think of it as a straight line, right? You write your introduction, and then you write your body paragraphs, and then you write your conclusion. But the reality is that when we talk about writing as a process, we're not talking about writing for something, one thing first, and the next thing next, and the next thing after that, because the reality is that writing is much more complex, and it has everything to do with who you are and the way that you think. And that's really something that I want us to understand about writing so that we can approach it perhaps differently than we have before. I say that writing is an act of surrender. You have to approach your writing task with an attitude of openness and expectation. Set aside preconceived ideas or negative attitudes, and don't begin by saying, I'm no good at this, which is often what is the first step to failure. It's the mindset, it's the attitude that this is gonna be hard and I'm not gonna succeed at it. Being a good writer is not about nailing it the first time, it's about not giving up until a piece is polished to perfection. Also keep in mind that writing is not going away. You will have to do it again and again. So you might as well surrender to the process. So we often think of writing only in the context of school, right? I don't like writing because I don't like writing essays, as if essays is the only time when you have to write something. And so that's why I'm saying, let's think about writing a little more broadly and understand that writing is very important to many other aspects of our life. So try reframing. Rather than throwing out all writing, think about the ways that writing is useful. Maybe you don't like to write essays, but in what other ways do you use writing to accomplish your goals? How would you answer that question? Give me some example of ways that you use writing to accomplish your goals. Right, to help you remember. Yes, definitely. Definitely a strong connection between writing and thinking. So thinking about the value of writing in use helps to diminish the negative attitudes we may have about it. A lot of times students butt up against use of writing in class because they don't get why they have to do it. But as soon as we start connecting it to things that really matter to us, it can change the way we think about it. Even though the writing that we do in class is not meaningless, it is an opportunity for you to practice a type of writing, but it also is meant for a purpose. And so if we even approach the kind of writing we don't enjoy with the understanding that I should still get something from this, the question then becomes, well, what is the purpose that this particular assignment is serving, and how might it serve me in some way? So how do you begin? My advice is to give yourself, you're looking at me side-eye, give yourself at least 3 days before the due date. Why does that, what? I mean, come on. Yes, 3 days minimum before the due date. Also, give yourself a different task for each day. Okay, so give yourself 3 days, but don't wait the 3 days to start, right? You have to actually do something on each of those days, but give yourself a small assignment for each of those days that will make the final product better. And one thing that will help you as well is free yourself from editing until the last day. And so on day one, you don't want to be thinking about whether your introduction is organized well. You don't want to be thinking about whether or not you spelled everything correctly. You don't want to be looking to see whether your commas are in the right place. On day one, that's not important. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, is what you need to be doing on each of these days. So if you only have 3 days, here's how you might break that down. So I'm borrowing from Elizabeth Gilbert's Eat, Pray, Love title for the task that you might do each day. The first day I say, think, pray, write. So whatever prayer is to you. Basically, it's about thinking through what it is that you need to accomplish in this task and beginning the writing process, getting something down on paper. Day 2, think, write, and rewrite. So all writing is rewriting, as someone has said. And so the second day, you want to go back through what you wrote on day one and think about it some more, and then write some more or rewrite what you wrote before. And then on day three, you're going to think, revise, and edit. As I said before, that would be the last step in the process, assuming you only have 3 days. The idea is to space out your work and to not try to do everything in one sitting. That might actually be freeing for some people who feel that, you know, doing it all in one sitting is what makes it sort of torturous. And so this is maybe a better way to do it. Now, if you have more than 3 days, then you can stretch that out a little bit. Maybe days 1 through 3, you spend thinking about your topic, doing a little bit of writing here and there. Days 3 through 5, you might do the thinking, writing, and rewriting piece. So you can kind of just stretch that out and look at what you have done over an extended period of time. Days 5 through 7, again, thinking and revising. Notice there's a repetition there, right? What are we doing throughout this entire process? Thinking. Why did I say that? Why am I doing this? What is it that I'm trying to accomplish? Who am I trying to speak to here? What information is needed that I haven't included yet? That's the thinking aspect that should be happening every step of the way. And then the final day is the only day that I would suggest that you spend time on the editing, unless you feel like you need more days to edit and polish. And sometimes, depending on the length or the complexity of the work, it may take more than a day to go through line by line and really look at those grammatical errors. But actually, as you're going through each of those processes of revising, you'll probably be fixing some of those things along the way too. So the last day or two, I would say for sure, is where you just want to kind of focus on editing only. And also remember that we're here to help through this process. So don't forget to call on us when you have writing assignments, and understand that the best time for you to come to the Writing Center is when you're early in your process. Don't come on day 8. And not let us have the opportunity of seeing how you got there. We can be of much more service to you if you give us the opportunity to help you from the beginning. We can brainstorm with you, we can help you free write and all of that sort of thing. So let's talk about day 1. Think, pray, write. What are some of the questions that you will need to ask yourself? What is your topic? What is required? What do I already know about this topic? What opinions do I have about this? Where do my thoughts and opinions come from? You want to think about experiences, observations, your personality, your family upbringing. A lot of times when we start writing assignments, and of course you may think, oh, this is only if you're writing for an English class and a personal essay, but no. Even if you're doing a research paper for a sociology class, these are the kinds of questions you want to ask. What is my attitude about this subject matter coming into this assignment? What is it that I already know? Maybe what I've learned from other classes, or what I've heard throughout my life, or what sort of common knowledge is to me, or what I remember hearing about on a news story. All of these things you want to kind of bring to the table as material that you perhaps will use in some way for the finished product. So that first day, again, while you want to give yourself some time, you want to just kind of pull everything out and see what you have to work with as you begin this particular assignment. So how might you answer these kinds of questions? Well, we have some suggestions for the day 1 process: free writing, listing or clustering, speaking into a recorder, conversing, and other ways of generating ideas, such as the journalist questions and the 5 senses. So what are all of these things? All of these are going to be dependent on who you are, the type of person you are, the way you process things. So if you're a person who likes lists, you know, you keep a journal, so maybe that's where you list all the things you have to do to keep your mind organized. Or maybe you're more free-flowing, you like to just sit down and see what comes out. Or maybe you have you're a visual learner where the clustering might be of use to you. Any one of these processes, or any combination of these, is where you want to sort of begin working through your thoughts on the subject or topic that you're writing on before you begin the actual formal writing of it. So what are we talking about when we are talking about free writing? My assistant, Krishandra, is going to talk a little bit about what exactly we mean by that.
Okay, so with me, free writing has become my best friend. I think I do it with almost all the papers that I write. So basically, this is the only time where you don't have to worry about a red pen. Like you can write without having to worry about grammatical errors like punctuation, all of it. And it helps you to get all of your thoughts out on paper. And once you're done, you can go back and look at your ideas, and it'll actually assist and help you develop your paper and know exactly what you want to talk about.
So what I would suggest with free writing is that you actually set a timer. Give yourself 5 minutes, 1 minute if you only have 1 minute, but not allow yourself to do anything but write for that period of time. Even if you find yourself going off topic, just not letting your pen leave the page or your fingers leave the keyboard until the time is up. What that does is really generate, it forces your mind to process and think some more and think some more. And even as you go off on tangents, you'll find yourself, that will remind you of something else that will really bring you back to the subject you started with. Or it may lead you in a direction that you want to explore further once you get to the end of this free writing moment. So that's a technique that I want us to try. Then we also have listing or clustering. So listing is really just doing the same thing as the free writing. You set yourself a timer and list everything that comes to your mind about that particular topic. Or if you're a more visual learner, you may try the clustering technique, which Ariana is going to explain.
Okay, so the clustering technique, so you have like your main idea of your paper, what you want to talk about, but then you branch out from that and like have topics that fall under that main idea. So my go-to is global warming. And so when you do global warming, you look at things like maybe pollution or O2 emissions or the hole in the ozone layer, stuff like that.
And so each of the bubbles, so the center bubble is the main topic, and the bubbles that branch off from it are any of those subtopics, and any bubble that branches off from those are those that connect to that, the bubble that's in the middle, and it can go on and on. Yeah, it's a really, I don't say picturesque, but a really graphic way of listing is based, or outlining in a way, in a visual way. There's also the speaking into a voice recorder. I've had many writers tell me that they are better at speaking their ideas than writing their ideas. So use the voice recorder on your phone to talk through whatever the topic is that you need to write about. Talking to someone else and maybe even recording that conversation. I know I tend to be one who generates a lot of ideas from dialogue. I'll come out here and be like, I was thinking about blah, blah, blah. And then as we talk, I'll go, oh yeah, that's a great idea. And then, the thing really came about because we were having a conversation. The journalist questions are the who, what, when, where, why, and how of your subjects that you might ask, in your free writing or in your listing. And then the 5 senses, how does this look, or how might this look, or taste, or touch? What would it feel like? What would it sound like? Depending on what your subject matter is, you might think of it in terms of the senses. So pick one of these ways to generate ideas surrounding a particular subject and think right now about a topic that you need to write on. Maybe you have an assignment that you've been given, maybe you have a writing project that you're interested in exploring, or just choose a topic that we can practice one of these techniques with. We're going to pass that, Ariana, if you would like to try the clustering, she has the handouts for the clustering exercise. If you're going to do free writing, we have these notebooks on our table. We can also give you some paper. You might need more paper than that. And there's pencils there as well. But I'm going to actually set the timer for, do we have 5 minutes? What's our time looking like? We're okay. So let's set our timer for 5 minutes. And I want you to try this exercise. See what you can do for the span of 5 minutes without stopping surrounding this topic that you have chosen, whatever it might be. And can you set yours? I don't know what one is. Pick a topic, or if you have a paper that you've already been assigned, maybe choose that topic, and then whichever exercise you want to use, go for it for 5 minutes. Just go with the flow. Yes. Okay, time's up. Does that seem like a lot of time or a little time? Yeah, you have more to say? More you could have written? Good, that's a good thing, right? Okay, so that's what you would do on day one. And maybe you'd say, you know what, I need 5 more minutes. I'm gonna do that exercise again and generate some more stuff. However long you need until you can't think of anything else to say. So if you're writing a research paper, day 2 should be spent reading and taking notes. And I actually have a PowerPoint presentation that I've done on the research writing process. And you can find that on our website if you want to see more about that. If you have a long research paper to write, your day 2 may need to stretch out to 3, 4, and 5. So again, when you're doing research, there's an added level of work that needs to go into it. So you want to think in terms of longer than 3 days before that due date, you have to add in the research process. So day 2, if you're doing research, your question to yourself should be, how does this information compare to what I already know? So at that point, you're doing the reading of different articles and book chapters or whatever. And so you want to think about what you're reading in your research process as far as whether the things that you have found confirm, refute, or enrich your understanding of your topic. And then in your notes, you'd write down your answers to those questions. So that's the day 2 part of the process if you're doing a research paper. If you're not doing research, or once you've read and taken notes on whatever you have read, or in this case, whatever you've brainstormed, you then want to think about what you have and think about how it might need to be structured based on what it is that you're writing for. So day 2 would be adding to what you wrote on day 1. And the question is, can you say more? To determine, you also want to determine what to keep and what to toss, considering your purpose and your audience. So remember, part of every stage of the process is thinking. This is the thinking part of it. You know, what have I written down already? What can I add, delete, or change around? What is it that I need to include in this final document based on what it is that I'm writing and who it is I'm writing for? And so that's what you would be doing on day 2 of your process. So the question that is often asked is, how do I say more? I was working with a student earlier who said, I don't like to write because I never have enough to say. Anyone ever encountered that? You feel like you've said it all in the first couple of sentences and you still got 3 more pages to go, right? So we want to offer you a possible technique for helping you to say more. First of all, you want to think about the main point that you're trying to make. Perhaps you have gotten it out on your paper during your brainstorming process, or maybe you already kind of have an idea of what that main point is. If you haven't already worked out a thesis, maybe you can try to work out a thesis statement, sort of the main point that this whole thing will somewhat be about. And I say working thesis because it may still change. You're still early in the process. But whatever statement you have in your drafting process, you want to find a way to develop that some more. And that's really where writers get stuck. They feel like the statements that they have made, not just the thesis statement, but any statement, says it all. But in reality, there's usually more that can be said. And so what we offer is what's called SEEI as a formula to develop and say more. Develop each of the statements that you make and say more. So SEEI stands for state, elaborate, exemplify, and illustrate. So each statement that you make, and I would suggest if you can begin with your thesis statement or your working thesis, and write that down. What is the statement or assertion that you're making? Then follow that one sentence with your elaboration. In other words, say more, even in a sentence or so, about what you meant in that initial statement. And then follow that with an example. So that's an actual instance of that thing being true, whatever that statement was that you made. And then follow that with an illustration. What an illustration does is deepen the impression and understanding of what you meant by giving a visual example, not an example, but a visual illustration that this thing is like something else. So it's really making a comparison to this thing that you are making a statement about and something that is like it in some way. And your illustration will really sort of solidify what you mean from that original statement. And it may even require you to say more about that, but that's in the handout that you'll get in just a little bit. So here's an example of how this might work. My statement is, writing is as much about learning as it is about writing. I probably need to say more, right? Okay, so let me say more. I will elaborate by saying, thoughts come to us randomly, sporadically, and at different times, so you have to take the time to think things through. For example, when I have a paper to write, I spend a lot of time figuring out what I want to say. My ideas are usually all over the place at first, so I have to make lists or free write for a while before I actually start. So I'm further explaining what I mean by the initial statement by giving an actual instance of me writing, because that's what I'm talking about, is the writing and learning process. Then I will illustrate what I mean by saying writing is like organizing your sock drawer. You have to dump all the ideas first, dump out all the ideas first, then put them together one by one until all of the things are together. So that's an illustration of the idea that I'm expressing or discussing. And the first one, the example is an actual instance of the writing process, and the illustration is what the writing process is like. So what about you? You have some things that you wrote down in the last practice session. Maybe you can pull something out of what you wrote, some statement, any statement, and we're going to try to elaborate on it using the SEEI. Now, I do have a handout for SEEI, this one. You gave that to them, so it explains the steps again. And I want you to just take a few minutes to see if you can develop one of your statements that you did in your brainstorming exercise and elaborate on it in some way. All right, so how was that? Did we get some things down to elaborate on our statement? So as you see from your handout, I see lots of writing happening, so y'all must have come up with something. But as you see from the handout, this is just, you just elaborated on one statement. Imagine if you did this throughout your paper with subsequent statements that you make and you link them together. When it comes time to do the organizing, you can see how you can quickly develop an idea using this method. So one thing that you might think about with the illustration, because that is the hardest one, is going back to your initial statement, right? So the initial statement is teaching. Okay, so one must know and love in order to pursue. So if you think, obviously you started thinking about the knowing and loving aspect of that statement as you thought it's like parenting and parenting. So you want to really, it helps you to sort of flesh out what you mean as well, what you're thinking. So if it's the knowing and loving aspect of teaching that makes it like parenting, then think of a way in which parenting draws out love or incorporates love and knowing of someone else in the same way that teaching does. So that it's really about helping you connect. So with each of the statements that follow and the example and illustration, you want to think, am I making the point that I started off with? Or does my example or illustration take me off to another point? Because then you might need to think about it again. And this is why thinking is so important throughout, because you need to clarify for yourself, what is it that I mean by this statement? And what is it that I'm trying to say, and how can I best show that in some way? What's the essence of the point that I'm making, and what would help best to illustrate that? What else do I connect with things like love and care and knowing? Then I might be able to think of a way to illustrate that point, which is the essence of the statement that I made initially. So then you need the time that I told you to take, because you got to have time to think all that through, right? So once you have something on your paper, once you've brainstormed and you've done the SEEI, you now have material to draw from. I am not an advocate of having students organize ideas they have not yet put on paper. I realize that sometimes teachers say, create an outline for the paper that's due in 2 weeks, and you got to come up with an outline that you're going to have to turn in for a grade. In actuality, for a lot of people, for most people, that is a really hard task, because if you haven't had an opportunity to think through what it is you want to say, it's going to be real hard to create an outline out of thin air, right? But what you have in front of you now are words and sentences that you actually can go back and look at and put into an outline. So what we call a reverse outline is a little bit better way to organize your ideas and begin to put it into the form and the shape that it needs to be in for the final product. Once you have some stuff to work with, you can begin organizing what you've written. Some of the things you want to think about at this point, again, is the purpose and audience. What is the information that they will need to know? What will be the best way to order this information, the ideas that I'm expressing in a way that someone who is not me will be able to follow? And then also, what does the professor require? Make sure you're meeting the mandate that he or she has laid out. Make sure what you've written is fitting with what he or she requires, because this will be the point where you're going to need to think about what should go in the introduction, what should go in your body paragraphs, and what you need to make sure that you include throughout. So your outline should begin with that main point. So you're going to really need to solidify that at this stage as you're revising and reworking what you've written thus far. Your introduction, you want to talk about how you're going to set up this discussion about this particular point. You want to think about what background information you might need and what support you will need for those statements and points that you have made. Perhaps you need some more details or examples, or if this is a research paper, you may need to do some research. At this point, you'll be able to know what research you need to do. Notice that for research writing, a lot of this that you just did precedes any research. You need to sort of have some idea of the direction before you know what to go and look for to add to the paper. So if you were to take what you've done thus far and organize it in some way, see whether or not you can begin to shape the draft that you have created just with these last few exercises into some format that makes sense, that begins to show a main point and supporting point. And there may still be gaps, but this is a way for you to see where those gaps are if you were developing a paper on this topic, by first putting the main point at the top and then the supporting points following it. It will help you to know what is still needed. So we'll just take a couple of minutes to let you organize what you've written thus far using the reverse outline handout. Supposed to speak to the handout. Is there anything that needed to be explained? I think I kind of did, didn't I? Okay, so what we have done thus far in this workshop is talk about the writing process and help you to actually develop a draft. A lot of times we talk about drafting, and I don't know that students really comprehend what it is we actually mean, because usually students will just throw something together at the last minute and turn it in. But I want us to think about the process that we have just gone through. And I want you to think or consider what you've been able to accomplish in the short time that we have just been sitting here. And understand that a draft is everything you write down relating to your topics. I think sometimes students assume that a draft is like a completed version of their paper. And they're like, well, I'm not doing I'm not writing this paper over 3 different times. That's not necessary. A draft is anything that you write. So from the brainstorming exercises, that would be one draft. To the SEEI exercise, that would be a different draft. And each of the things that you added and took away in your process would be another version of it. So any ideas that you put on paper, regardless of the form, would be your first draft. And each time you add or delete would be a subsequent draft. Your final draft is when you move from revision to editing. So as I said earlier on, all writing is rewriting. So you begin with the initial brainstorming exercise, and then after that, you're revising, and then revising again, and then revising again, and revising again, until you continue to get closer to that final version of the paper that you will ultimately turn in or submit or do something with. So when we talk about revision, we are not talking about editing. Those are two different things. A revision is changing the content. That is the overall idea, where you ask yourself, what is it that I'm saying, and am I making it clear? What is the best way to say it? That's where you're dealing with the organization and whether the paragraphs are pushing forward that main point. You are adding to and deleting from the main idea in the revision process. Proofreading and editing, on the other hand, as I said at the very beginning, is the very last step in the process. Proofreading happens once the content is solidified. You don't want to start changing sentences or editing commas and semicolons when the ideas are not solid, when you're probably going to move a paragraph out completely. You're wasting your time, right? So you want to make sure those bigger issues are pretty much taken care of before you start looking at things like sentence structure, fragments, run-ons, subject-verb agreement, comma splices, and spelling. Don't get caught up doing those kinds of editing tasks earlier on, because what will actually happen is you'll stagnate your thinking process about the bigger issues that you need to focus on. And then I always encourage students, when you are finished with your paper, to look over it, reread it before letting someone else evaluate it, whether that someone else be a writing center person or the professor. I'm amazed at students who tell me when I'm asking them about their paper that they don't even remember what they wrote because they wrote it so long before. And I'm like, you didn't read this after you printed it off? I'm like, no, I haven't looked at that at all. You gotta evaluate your paper before someone else does. You'll more easily catch the things that you meant or didn't mean to say than anyone else could. And you certainly don't want someone who's going to evaluate it with a grade looking at it before you've had a chance to go over it. So you want to check to see whether your purpose is clear, whether the direction is going the way it should, whether it's carefully organized and in a logical order. And a lot of times that requires some distance. When you're first writing it, you know what you mean to say, you know what you want to say, and it makes perfect sense in that moment. But have you ever looked at something a day or two later and thought to yourself, what in the world was I thinking? That's why you got to give yourself time and distance in order to make sure that you've actually done what it is that you set out to do. Then you can look at those things like style, whether the way that you've said things is the best way it can be said. And then the little things like the presentation, spelling, punctuation, and capitalization, etc. Is this a good reflection of what you can do overall? That's the main question. So you know where to find us because you're already here. And you know what we do because I told you at the beginning, we're here to help you and support you in your writing process at whatever stage you might be. Hopefully you'll come to us earlier in the process so we can help you more. If you come to us later in the process, we will help you be able to help you less. Because if the paper is due tomorrow or in an hour, there's not a whole lot we'll be able to offer. We can be found on Facebook and on Instagram, and we have a website which provides you the same resources that you find in the center. We can also set up appointments for you there. You can do a face-to-face appointment, or you can do a virtual appointment as well. So we look forward to seeing you, and we trust that you will crush whatever writing path you have in front of you. Thanks for coming, and I will see you next time.